We will be meeting at 6:30 every morning except Wednesday. That means Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. With the exception of the second Thursday of each month, which means that this week we have a second Thursday coming up, so we'll do today and then Friday this week. And then in the following weeks we'll meet 4 days a week. In the way of a memory technique. What I've found over the decades is that neuroanatomy is like a foreign language. If you don't use it, it disappears with a half-life of about half a day. And so the only reason that I can give this course to people who have never had a neuroanatomy course before, and those who have had several, is that whatever they've got from previous courses, they've forgotten, practically. The other reason I can give this course this way is that practically no one else organizes it this way. And so even if you have a fair knowledge of neuroanatomy, it's not likely that you will have heard it presented exactly the same way. And what I plan to do is to build on embryology and a little comparative anatomy and physiology and clinical pathological work, and try to organize things in a way that will be memorable. And then, the only class in the university is 6:30. But you were expecting something at 6:30? This is it. Now, before we get too deeply into the course, I should give you a hint. The answer to any question, almost any question that I can ask, is 3. And there's a very good reason why it's 3. I mean, 3 is an ancient, mystical, religious prime number, but basically it relates to the nervous system because that's the way it develops. And if you recall, as I'm sure you all do, the cross-section of ectoderm, which divides more rapidly in the center and forms a neural plate, divides more rapidly still, so it has to buckle in. Form a neural groove with neural crests on either side. And these then fuse so that we have the skin ectoderm above and a neural tube below. Which has a groove, the sulcus limitans, dividing the dorsal and ventral halves. And the neural crest cells have given rise to cells that migrate away as the third element. So very quickly, in the early embryology of the nervous system, we have 3 parts. We have the neural crest cells that, among other things, give rise to dorsal root ganglion, and the neural groove, which gives rise to the neural tube, with the sulcus limitans dividing dorsal and ventral quadrants, so that we have these 3 components. which turn out to be come grab a chair somewhere. Motor neurons, sensory neurons, and the element in between, association neurons, interneurons. That's the beginning of the answer 3. It will continue. Each of these can be divided into 3 parts too. We'll see that there are 3 sizes and basic functions of sensory neurons, small, medium, and large. That there are 3 sizes and functions of motor neurons, small, medium, and large. And that forces the association plate to have 3 components. I have a rule in my courses that if at any time it doesn't make sense, holler. Speak up. I will assume, if you don't, that it has made sense. If it hasn't made sense so far, it's not going to make sense from this point on. That's my reason to ask you to interrupt. If there's anything fuzzy, now's the time to try and straighten it out. Now this is all very well for a cross-section. But if we look at this from above, in a dorsal view, we'll see a line looking like this, the midline, and we'll see the neural plate from above, looking down on it. We'll see the neural crests beginning to approach the midline and fuse. And this is about the mid-cervical region where they first fuse. And then this zippering together proceeds rostrally and caudally. And the last point to fuse in front will be the anterior neuropore. And the last point to fuse post-caudally will be the posterior neuropore. And come in. We got 1 chair there and 2 chairs up here. Terminalis. That is the front end of the 3rd ventricle. The posterior neuropore is approximately, where am I? Sorry?
Lumbar, almost like a lumbar.
Any particular region? Somewhere around L3. Now, Sean, just before you came in, I suggested that people interrupt me if there was anything hazy about all this so far. And I would have thought that even though it's early in the morning, that there'd be a question now. What's the question, Mike?
My question is when do they fuse in relationship to each other? At what point development is that?
Oh, this is very early in development. Streeter's horizon, 11, 12, somewhere in there. It's approximately at it's between the 20th and the 30th somite stage. Approximately 25 somites, give or take a few. But there's a more fundamental question. Well, if this fuses at L3, how does the rest of the lumbar, sacral, coccygeal segments, how do they form? Can they possibly form the way we've said before? Through a neural plate, through a neural groove, through a neural tube, with neural crest cells. And the answer to all these nice blank faces this morning is 6:43. Is no, it can't possibly form that way. How could you have a neural plate caudal to the posterior neural cord? This now closes. You would have to postulate that this neural plate is continued on down, and that there's been some closure below in order to come back up and have the last hole in this unclosed neural groove to be at L3. And that won't work because it starts up in the neck and fuses together. Now, there are some skip areas every now and then. Leave a little hole here, but that'll close in rather quickly. This is the big hole. All the lumbar, half the lumbar, all the sacral, coccygeal segments. And so this is a riddle I'll leave you with for a moment to call your attention to the fact that there is another mechanism for the formation of the caudal-most segments. And this becomes important when you talk about the Arnold-Chiari malformation and lumbar sacral meningomyelocele. It'll make a difference clinically, surgically, as to whether it occurs at the closure of the posterior neural cord, roughly the mid-lumbar region, or whether it occurs more caudally. Is it clear that there's a problem? The solution to the problem is that caudally there is an independent development beneath the skin, beneath the ectoderm, an independent development of neural tissue. It's going to form little bubbles that coalesce into a tube that secondarily coalesces with the major part of the developing nervous system. And normally that happens very rapidly, smoothly, and we end up with a neural tube that goes all the way from the front end, the anterior neural cord, to the tail end, coccygeal, or the coccygeal segment you want to have. But in the abnormal situation, if the posterior neural cord persists, you'll end up with a very severe malformation, which includes an open meningomyelocele in the mid-lumbar region. The skin, the neural crests don't fuse, and so the skin can't cover it over. And so you have a bare neural plate with skin on either side of it. And associated with that, you have all the rest of the arnold-chiari malformation. With difficulty in the neck, cerebellum, difficulty glossally with hydrocephalus. And it's a surgical medical emergency at the time of birth. It's a dreadful complication for the kid. But it all goes back to whether there's a problem at this point of closure.
Is there associated neural crest tissue that also forms independently?
Well, presumably. Because we do have ganglia, obviously, for those caudal segments. And I don't honestly know where they develop from, because there is no neural crest from the development. So they must develop from this caudal cell mass, which is said to be pluripotential and contribute to development of gut as well as nervous system. Come in. Have a couple chairs up here. Okay, so that's a little digression. I started off by saying that the answer is 3. Any question that I might ask. There will be variations on that answer of 3, of course. There will be some other words to fill in after you figure out the answer. The basic answer is 3. Then you have to figure out 3 what's. But I'll give you one reason why the basic answer is 3. Because the neural crest and the neural tube give rise to 3 major components of a neural segment: sensory, association, and motor components. And I've given you a hint, a prediction. As we talk about these in more detail, there will be 3 components of each of them. 3 sensory, 3 motor, and therefore 3 association elements. I haven't told you yet, I'm going to tell you now, that this is a basic component of a segment. Now, a segment, in my scheme of things, is different from a section. It's virtually impossible to make a microscopic or gross section of my segments. We'll come to that in more detail later on, but I just want to clue you in that segments and sections, although they look superficially similar, are different, are fundamentally different. In most courses of neuroanatomy, will give you cross-sectional anatomy. If that's what you're looking for, go read one of those books. That's not what you're going to get out of me until the end of the course. end of the course, we'll fill in the cross-sections. But between now and then, we're going to be talking, first of all, about segments and the three fundamental components of each segment. If you follow so far, you will see that all of these components of a segment might not be present in any section. And that's because some of them migrate. Most of you, I think, are aware of the fact that nerve cells do migrate. Some of them migrate quite long distances. But that doesn't change the basic segmental structure that they began with. Now there's another component to the answer 3. An entirely different approach. And that is seen if we look at the early neural tube, not from the top view, but from a side view. And we look at these from the side at an early stage when it looks something like this. With the sulcus limitans dividing this hollow neural tube, which is a mid-sagittal view, into dorsal and ventral. Or motor and association. Components. And where is the sensory component? It's going to be on the far side of this wall, which makes it difficult for me to draw. So I'm going to cheat and put it out front here as a dorsal root ganglion for each segment. So to take any particular segment, we'll have a sensory element in the dorsal root ganglion projecting towards and into the association plate. An association plate element making a segmental, intra-segmental connection to a motor plate element. And we have now in this horizontal plane, which I've distorted, because it's behind the wall here, exactly the same elements as we had over here in this cross-section of the segment. This basic structure continues through the nervous system up to this point. And so if we make a couple of cuts at these two bends, we'll have another pattern of 3. Rostral and caudal, and in between. And just roughly, these will grow up into brain stem, and spinal cord.
you ever have a sensory neuron that synapses directly on dendrites of the motor neuron?
Yep. Well, I'm trying to sketch in at the moment in sort of broad overview. There are going to be a lot of exceptions. Well, not a lot. There'll be some. And I'll tell you about each exception, because my general conclusion has been, after decades of going through this, and I should digress a moment to say that when I was a freshman medical student, we were given a sheep brain and Ranson's textbook. No lectures. And we were supposed to learn this. Well, up to that point in my life, I had succeeded only because of lectures. I didn't like to read books. Never realized what the hell I was going to get into as life progressed. But I was at a total loss. That whole course. It must be such a strong stimulus that it forced me into the field. No, that wasn't why. It was because Louis Hausmann, the second year, was invited by Harold Wolff, who was the chief of neurology at Cornell, to give 3 one-hour lectures at the beginning of a neurology course. And he gave 3 one-hour lectures that said to me, Buster, this can be organized. Harold Wolff's approach was, here's the 100 irreducible minimum of neurology. And I said, that can be reduced. But you can't start off with the irreducible minimum of 100 things. You can't start off with 10 contraindications to appendectomy. I mean, you just can't do it that way. I can't do it that way. I can count to 3. So that's why we start this course off on the theme of 3. I think if you can remember 3 things, and each of those divided by 3, and another arrangement of 3, you can find some way of doing what I did for the final exam. They did give 1 lecture in the first year, and that was on the internal capsule, which was a great big mystery then. It remained so for a long, long time. But the final exam consisted of 4 questions, each of the pair, to choose one of the pair. And somehow I was able to distort the question into the internal capsule and was able to pass the damn exam. I don't know how. It was just awful. I have no idea what the 4 questions were, why I struggled to get them into the internal capsule. Okay, back to the embryo with 3 major divisions. This is now going to grow up into something that doesn't look like this at all. The segments will go up to this midbrain flexure, through the whole brainstem and spinal cord. And so for each of these segments, we're going to expect to find sensory motor sensation plates. The audio turned on. What you've now heard is the 7 o'clock musical interlude, courtesy of Dr. Shaw, who found this clock in Tokyo Christmas ago. It plays a different tune every hour, and as you saw, as 4 little men come down to strike for an hour. Anyway, segments, brainstem segments. Each of them is going to contain these 3 components. Some are going to be lost. some are going to have extra components. But in general, you would be looking for 3 components. And these segments in the, well, we'll give us C1, C2, C3, and so on down, the coccygeal segments. And in the brainstem, how many segments are we going to have? 3. An anterior, middle, and posterior hindbrain. And then we have to get one in here to have the hindbrain separate from the forebrain. Which we're going to call the midbrain. And now you see I've given you 2 more groups of 3. If we take out the brain, as we will in the adult, usually, by cutting the spinal cord at approximately C1 at the foramen magnum level, we will have forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain in our hand. It look like that in the adult.
From that.
3 parts. The hindbrain, 3 parts. Let me give you another example as to why there are 3 parts of the hindbrain. We'll digress a moment. Each segment is going to have a blood supply, the segmental artery. And so how many segmental arteries are there going to be at the brainstem? The hindbrain? 3. At least one of them's gotten the message. There will be 3 segmental arteries. Trigeminal, odic, hypoglossal. They're going to disappear along with C1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. C7 is going to come in as the continuation of those fused pieces of the segmental arteries to form the vertebral basilar system. But before that was present, you had arteries that came in as a segmental rostral caudal division. These fuse and these disappear all the way down to C7, where we get the vertebral artery in its adult pattern. Occasionally these will persist as a persistent trigeminal or persistent odic or persistent hypoglossal, persistent cervical segment, segmental arteries. They're rare, but you'll see them occasionally. Before I grow this up to the adult, let me give you another reason why neuroanatomy, neuroanatomical answers are 3. we have not only these segmental structures, but suprasegmental structures. Suprasegmental in the sense that they are totally dependent upon the segments for input and output, but they make massive interconnections. And these develop in relation to the hindbrain as the cerebellum. From the colliculi, from the midbrain, and the colliculi, protect them. And from the forebrain as forebrain. And so we have three suprasegmental structures: cerebellum, colliculi, and forebrain. You will notice that this last has developed completely rostral to the sulcus limitans. And indeed, these other two developed from the dorsal tissue above the sulcus limitans, from the association plate. So that the suprasegmental structures are really amplifications of association plate. The easiest place to see that in its most primitive form is in the first part of the cerebellum, which develops in relation to the vestibular nucleus. And what one has is a two-way connection. Coming out towards us or away from the wall in a horizontal plane, basically, horizontal axial, if you wish, like the other segments. This is a two-way amplification of the dorsal association plate component related to the vestibular nucleus, vestibular end organ, the sensory plate element, out here specifically for gravity receptors, which make connections with the association plate and hence to the flocculonodular lobe, which is stage one of the cerebellum. Most of the other suprasegmental structures have gone beyond that two-way communication, simple segmental, essentially almost intra-segmental amplification, and have developed inputs from other segmental structures, outputs to other segmental, suprasegmental structures. But that's one of the most primitive patterns.
Is the word tectum synonymous with the word colliculi?
Right. Tectum is a roof over the aqueduct, which is a remainder of this hollow neural tube at the level of the midbrain. So, quadrigeminal plate, referred to when you look at it from above, from behind, dorsally, to two superior, two inferior colliculi as four bodies, quadrigeminal plate, or you look at it as a hollow aqueduct and a roof over it as a tectum, or give them their individual names, the superior and inferior colliculi. It's all synonymous, basically. And that's another one of the problems with neuroanatomy. Not only is it a foreign language, which you have to use all the time, and probably nobody does, it's a foreign language in which synonyms are numerous, but rarely really true synonyms. This is one of the few places where they're essentially synonymous. They mean exactly the same thing. So we can speak of the quadrigeminal plate or the collicular plate or the tectal plate. Looking at it as a plate of tissue covering the aqueduct. We usually use the word tectum when we talk of tectospinal outgrowth, tecto hypothalamic. Probably because it's shorter than the others. But I've already told you that two words that look similar, segment and section, are by no means synonymous. And I'm about to tell you why. Give you another example. I've shown the cerebellum developing from two components of the hindbrain, a vestibular gravity system. The second stage of the cerebellum develops in relation to the trigeminal, the main sensory nucleus of the trigeminal. And since this system is developing in relation to other sensory input and becomes increasingly important as vertebrates develop the ability to swim, wiggle their tail, and move their fins in a coordinated fashion, and need some input from down below, we'll have one of the inputs from spinal segments coming up, curving around the main sensory trigeminal nucleus to enter into this cerebellar system, stage 2 of the cerebellum, the trigeminal spinal stage, as what will become the ventral spinocerebellar tract, carrying all kinds of sensory input from segments into the cerebellum. Totally useless piece of information from the point of view of neurosurgeons, neurologists studying humans. It carries no weight clinically, if I know. But it carries a very important little piece of baggage with it. When you're asked, why the hell does the ventral spinocerebellar tract take this peculiar course? You come all the way up to the anterior hindbrain region before it curves back into the cerebellum. It's a very strange course. Once you know about the rest of the cerebellar connections, which come in straight in from the inferior penile. But that's a whole other story. Well, let's grow this up so it looks something like the adult. Well, let's see. We'll start with an anterior commissure and up the chiasm of the mammillary body and get the diencephalon in here. And make my corpus callosum in. That'll give us a piece for the guide the roof of the third ventricle, the floor of the third ventricle, floor of the aqueduct, the fourth ventricle. Come around here to the posterior commissure and the aqueduct. Okay, we got some landmarks here now. Here we have the midbrain, pons, patella, spinal cord. We want the roof of the aqueduct like so. We want the colliculi in here. We want the cerebellum in here. And then let's put the whole forebrain here. First. Temporal lobe coming up. All right. On the other side of the wall. So, here we have forebrain. midbrain, hindbrain, spinal cord segments. Here we have cerebellum. And a cerebellar associated structure, the pons, which is a whole new component of distortion of brainstem segments that, with other structures, make the anterior, middle, and posterior hindbrain segments look not at all like the other segments. Midbrain with the coeculi, and then the forebrain we're going to divide into how many parts? All in favor of 3? All in favor of 3? Mike? Absolutely. Everyone? See, you're wrong. This time we're going to divide it into 2 parts. We have the diencephalon and the telencephalon.
What are the adult analogs of the anterior, middle, and posterior hindbrain?
Good question. Now I have to develop it just a little bit further. Give me another minute.
Okay.
The diencephalon relates to the third ventricle, and the telencephalon to the lateral ventricles. And that's why we only have 2 parts of the forebrain. So that's the first real exception I've given you. Well, I've given you a couple of other exceptions if you paid attention. Because we only have 2 origins of the cerebellum and only 2 origins of the coeculi. And maybe that makes it easier to have only 2 origins of the forebrain. Anyway. Now, to come back to the hindbrain. The segmental component of the hindbrain is still there. It's in what is known as the tegmentum, or reticular formation of the brainstem. It is obscured by the major structure, the pons, and the inferior olives pyramidal tracts. And so if you go by a terminology that pays attention to cross-sections, you'll find this called midbrain, this called pons, and this called medulla. Medulla oblongata, but we don't use medulla spinalis. And so midbrain, pons, and medulla, 3 gross anatomical terms, but they include major portions, 90+%, suprasegmental structures, essentially totally unrelated to the segmental structures, and just serving to obscure, at least for the moment, the basic segmental components. But the sensory motor association plates of midbrain, anterior, middle, and posterior hindbrain are still there. Of course, the ganglia are periphery, behind the borders of the sagittal plane. So each of these segments should have, and even do have, dorsal root ganglia, equivalents, sensory ganglia, that relate essentially one to each segment. So in growing this up from the mesencephalic and cervical flexures, I've gone quickly through and past the pontine flexure, we won't talk about it anymore, and straightened up the whole brainstem spinal cord to have a series of horizontally arranged segments, and allowed the forebrain to develop a massive component that overshadows all the rest involved. And contains the, well, what we could spend most of the course on. We won't. We're going to spend about half the course on segmental structures, and about half the course on suprasegmental structures. But each of these segments, each of these sections of the adult brainstem will contain, or we will look for, the primitive segmental structures of motor and association plates in each of these three brainstem segments. And I can warn you, they will be hard to find because of the obscuring suprasegmental components, but they're there. And they obviously make up the major components of all the cranial nerves. The third component of the segment is going to be outside. Is that totally true?
No.
How many exceptions?
Well,
You wouldn't be nice if there were three exceptions. Unfortunately, only one exception I know of. One. Which one's that?
trigeminal.
Which one?
The components in the mesencephalic.
Mesencephalic trigeminal nucleus is really a peripheral dorsal root and a primary sensory neuron. It lies inside. And like all nice neurons, sensory neurons, have a peripheral and a central component of a T-shaped cell, one of which goes out to a spindle, the other which goes to make a connection to a motor neuron, which goes out to muscle, and you have the basis of the jaw reflex. You stretch the spindles and jaw muscles, you get a monosynaptic reflex connection of jaw muscles. Every other sensory neuron lies outside here and has exactly the same kind of component. If you take one of these as a large neuron, have a spindle, and this is the one major exception that you asked about before, where it comes in, makes a monosynaptic connection And whatever segment this happens to be, you can stretch the spindle and evoke a monosynaptic reflex contraction of that particular muscle in which that spindle is played. And it's the association plate of that spindle. I've taken the cervical one here to begin with. This spindle afferent is going to have a caudal public directed branch and a rostral directed branch that will go into the association plate element and will project into the cerebellum through the inferior peduncle. And now, if it wasn't clear before, this was the dorsal spinocerebellar tract, say here. Going through the inferior peduncle. And this was the ventral spinocerebellar tract. Going in through the superior cerebellar peduncle. But it wasn't clear before, I hope it's clear now, why this is such a peculiar path. So any questions? Well, my goal this morning was not quite completed. I was going to show you the whole nervous system in one drawing, but that's enough at the moment. Just to recapitulate briefly, we have segments and supersegments in terms of organs, basic organ structures. Each segment has three components. There are three supersegmental structures. There are three sensory components, small, medium, and large, we'll come to next time, that will project to their particular association plate elements. Those association plate elements will project to each of the three supersegmental structures. As well as make connections to motor plate elements. The motor plate elements then will be subjected not only to some monosynaptic sensory plate components, many more multisynaptic components of the association plate, and many more of the descending supersegmental tracts involving cerebellum, colliculi, and forebrain. So everywhere we look, we're going to be looking for three major components on the sensory: ascending supersegmental, descending supersegmental, motor output. So that, in brief, is why the answer is 3. Now, one final question, preceded by a statement. It should be clear from this diagram that all segmental structures are ipsilateral. How many exceptions are there? On that note, quit. Give you a little homework.